Thank you for joining us on the porch. I'm State Representative Jane Garibay, and I'm here today with Representative Joshua Elliott from the 88th District. Just a little bit about Josh. Since winning the 88th District seat in the Connecticut General Assembly in 2016, he has advocated for implementing progressive policies that will help improve Connecticut's economy and to help it to remain competitive with our surrounding states. He grew up in Connecticut and attended school in Hamden, graduated with a BA in sociology from Ithaca College. He later went on to obtain his JD at Quinnipiac Law School, and he is co-owner of Shelton's The Common Bond Market and Thyme and Season in Hamden, which he also manages. They're two family-run natural food stores, and I've been to the one in Hamden, and it's fabulous.
Thank you.
Josh recognizes the importance of investing in working families, businesses, both large and small. He has spearheaded efforts to legalize the use of recreational marijuana, sought to equalize property taxes, and consistently supported establishing a more equitable tax structure. He currently serves as Assistant Majority Leader and Vice Chair of the Commerce Committee. He is also a member of Finance, Revenue and Bonding, and Energy and Technology Committee. Wow. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks for having me, Jane.
No, so glad you could be here. I know it's a busy day, and to take time out first thing I would like to talk about is tax equity. It's something I've been interested in, and there's sound bites put out there that aren't true. So I'd like to work through a little bit of that. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by tax equity?
Sure. So there are a few different ways that both the municipality and the state gets its revenue. The municipality is pretty limited. The municipality almost exclusively relies on the property tax.
Right.
The state has a number of other taxes. There's the income tax, which we're all aware of. There's sales tax, there's gas tax, and then there's corporate taxes, and that's the biggest chunk of them. And then there's other very smaller taxes, but that's the vast majority of them. So when I talk about tax equity, what I mean is there's a study in 2014 that the state commissioned. And basically what the study says is the more money that you make in our state, the less you are paying as a percentage of your income. And so why is that? Connecticut is highly dependent on property taxes to fund education. And normally what would happen is that other states have county-based systems that fund their education, so they can equalize out between wealthier towns and not as wealthy towns. Here we really rely on the state to send money back to help equalize that out, but the state doesn't do a very good job of that. That means that places like Greenwich can have a mill rate of 11, where a place like Hamden, where I'm from, can have a mill rate of around 52. And so it's backwards right there. But even if you just think of this in terms of, if you're making $50,000 a year and you own a $250,000 home, chances are the vast majority of what you are worth is stored in equity in your home. So when you're getting taxed on your home, you're getting taxed on all of your wealth. If you're very wealthy, you make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, millions of dollars a year, chances are your home is not going to be worth millions and millions of dollars. Let's say it's worth $750,000. But even so, the vast majority of your money is most likely going to be in the stock market, in equities, or in your business. And the amount that your house is worth compared to your income is very different as well. It's a much smaller percentage as opposed to being a much bigger percentage when you are making more modest income. And so for all of those reasons, you're getting taxed on all of your wealth. You're not getting taxed based on what your income is. And so the way that those taxes hit somebody in the middle class is way harder. And so we do have the income tax on the state level, which you could say arguably works to offset how regressive that tax is. But the problem is that the difference in rates between every income bracket isn't nearly big enough to offset how backwards those other taxes are. The sales tax, similarly, is also very backwards and regressive. If you imagine that you and I, what are we going to go through? A loaf of bread a week, once every 2 weeks? Well, we're getting taxed. Actually, it's a bad example because we actually don't tax groceries in Connecticut.
Right.
So whatever it is. So whatever goods that you and I buy, we're going to buy the same amount approximately as somebody who's extremely wealthy, and we're getting charged a tax on that amount. And if that tax ends up being $1, the dollar compared to your and my income versus the dollar compared to somebody who's ultra wealthy is going to be a much smaller percentage. So even though we're paying the same amount of sales tax on that same item, it's unlikely that somebody who's making a lot of money is going to be buying 20, 30, 40 times of the amount of those things. Right. So they're also paying, as a result of that, less in taxes for sales tax as compared to their income. And so when I talk about regressive taxes, that's what I talk about. That's why the property tax and sales tax are regressive, because they're not linked to income, whereas the income tax is the only way we can have some sort of equity built into the system, so that once you outrun the cost of living, life just doesn't become throwing money at you, right, which is what it is right now. It becomes very, very easy to live once you have a lot of money and you've outgrown those costs.
So, and what I've been reading lately, did it all start with Governor Lowell Weicker in the sense that he did away basically with capital gains?
Right.
So that benefited all the rich people on their properties. At the same time, he instituted a 5.5% income tax that hurt the middle and below class. Was it okay before that?
So there is this sense that in 91, when we passed the income tax, that was better for Connecticut and provided more equity, and that's not the case. It actually ended up making things way worse. And for the reason that you said is that we stopped taxing capital gains at a different rate, and we just started taxing it as normal income. But that's highly problematic. And it went from, I think, a capital gains tax rate of somewhere between, I want to say 12 to 15% down to that 5%. And who are the people that are paying capital gains? The people that are making lots and lots of money, and who are, quite frankly, not physical laborers. They are not, independent business owners. They are people that are very often hedge fund managers making money through the stock market.
And they all moved to Connecticut because it was so cheap. Sorry.
Right. And so there's this perception that all of a sudden that income tax came in and things became more fair. Things actually became a lot less fair as a result of that income tax. And so, but it's hard because you don't expect that to be the case when you hear about there being a whole new tax.
Right.
But that is ultimately happening, and the ultra wealthy, of course, got this huge windfall.
Right. So let's say we were to put a tax for the top 2% or 3%, whatever that number is. Would we then be able to lower property taxes for people of less income?
So one thing I always try to make a point of when I talk about tax equity is that I'm not talking about just raising taxes. We could very well, within this conversation, be saying, let's keep the amount of revenue that Connecticut remains the same. And we could still be talking about tax equity. So what I'm talking more about is where that money comes in from. So if we were to raise more from the wealthy, then that would allow us potentially to send more money back from the state. Now, the state is only sending back something like 60% of what it should be to municipalities, and it's been doing that for a very long time. And so the argument is that you send more money back, it eases the town's need to be relying on the property tax.
Right.
I do think that there is an effect, a problematic effect that I do not necessarily have an answer for, that you could send money back to the towns. The towns could still say, great, thanks for the extra money. Here's some more for town workers, here's some more for services, some things that you could say are good, some things that you could say are bad. So I don't think that necessarily sending more money back to municipalities will de facto mean that property taxes will go down. But it's the only way that we have to try to make property taxes go down, because it still comes down to the mayor or your city councilors, right, or your aldermen to determine how best to serve their constituents. I would say that it is more likely than not that property taxes would go down were we to send more money back from the state. So the answer is yes, probably.
So it's not just adding taxes on taxes. It's like restructuring and looking how can we have equity in what people pay And you're talking about, even if we kept it at the same, where does that money come from? Now, the one question, people tend to say, oh my God, if we do that, we're going to lose those people from the state. And a friend of mine who might fit in that category said, he goes, people stay where their grandchildren and their families are. And Connecticut is still a great state to live in. What do you say to these people?
So there's a couple different arguments about why we should keep the system the way that it is. The millionaire migration myth is one of them, and I'll come back to that. One other argument that I hear often is this idea of ensuring that we know or can estimate better the amount of revenue that we're going to take in. So we don't want to rely too much on volatile income streams. Property taxes generally are going to be very stable. Property values are going to be generally very stable. And so for that reason, when you say at the beginning of the year, the mill rate's going to be this amount, we expect to take this amount in, you're usually going to be pretty close to what your estimate is. When it comes to income taxes and the stock market, which we know is highly volatile, from year to year, it's very hard to estimate how much you're going to take in. So it's a lot harder to say, okay, we're going to spend money on this, this, and this, because you just don't know. There's a much wider window of how much we take in. So my argument to that is simply, then let's be conservative with our estimates. Let's always estimate on the lowest side of what we think we're going to take in. Always give us that room for error and that buffer so that when we're wrong, we're okay. And when we're right, we're paying down what is, quite frankly, a burdensome amount of debt, both on the state level and certainly in Hampton. I'm not sure how it is where you are, but we are literally on the razor's edge of becoming a MARB town. And I think that we are ultimately going to get there, unfortunately. But it always comes down to, and this is speaking as somebody who is a outspoken liberal Democrat, that does not mean that you just spend money willy-nilly. Right. I also come from a family, my mother's a business owner, and I own 2 businesses. And if you aren't conservative in your estimates, you're only leaving yourself open to harm and damage over time. So I really believe strongly in being very conservative in the way that you estimate. So that's what I would say about that one issue about making sure that we don't over-rely on volatile income streams. Then the next part is, well, if you tax rich people, they'll leave. And I think that argument on its face makes sense. And it is based on this idea of the rational person model, which has been an economic model since the 40s, 50s. And over the last 10, 15 years, economists have almost completely debunked the rational person model because people do not act rationally, generally speaking. And the ways that they don't act rationally are done in very systematic ways. We are very much afraid of loss far more than we want gain. And we don't do things based just on monetary appeal. So just because someone is going to get taxed more, if that was the only thing that they were thinking about, then sure. Of course, that ignores all the frictional costs of moving. It ignores the fact that if you built your business up here, you'd have to rebuild your business there. Right. And so that doesn't make sense. Yeah, it ignores the fact that you have friends, family, colleagues, that your kids are in school, that you moved here because you love it here, because there's culture here, because you're between New York and Boston. Right. There's an infinite number of things that makes Connecticut a highly attractive place to live. And if all you do is focus on tax rate, and say, we're so expensive, no, there's a reason the Republicans really focus on this as an issue. It's because Connecticut's like a nice place to live. It is. Not for everybody. And certainly, when you look at issues about like socioeconomic stratification, when you look at racial segregation, when you look at issues that go a little bit below the surface, Connecticut is not necessarily very welcoming to everybody, nor is it very easy to live here for everybody. But by and large, it is a beautiful place to live, and we are fairly progressive, and the white liberals try to do their best to make this as welcoming for everybody, even in the face of difficulty. But I would say that there are a lot of reasons other than the tax structure about why people would want to be here. Right.
I wish we were like New Hampshire with the liquor stores. Seriously.
Yeah.
So that brings me to another question. You and I have had short discussions on the legalization of marijuana. You know that I'm pretty unsure, whether if I vote for it, I want to vote for it because it's the best thing for Connecticut, not just for the revenue stream.
Right.
And you've been a leader in that charge. Can you tell us a little bit about what you think about it?
Yes. So I believe very strongly that a punishment model, if you are looking to change behavior, does not work. I view this through the lens as someone who raised dogs for guiding eyes for the blind. And when we first started, there was a model that was provide some negative feedback for the things that you didn't want and provide positive feedback for the things that you do want. And over time, they realized that negative feedback doesn't help, doesn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
The dog knowing what not to do doesn't help the dog to know what to do. And so providing that positive feedback is really the model that I think, and I think that's any living creature, humans included, that if you provide a model of what you should do, I think that's how you change people's behavior. So when it comes to something like cannabis use or drug use generally, I think that there's certainly a shift in the medical community about seeing addiction as a mental health issue, but that for some reason has not transferred over to the population at large. And my whole conceptualization of why we need to legalize cannabis, it first started for many folk, I'm sure, as being, a young stoner 20-something, being like, why is this illegal? Okay. And then you sort of slowly understand what the history and the underpinnings are. You understand the war on drugs and how it's disproportionately affected Black and brown people. You understand that, maybe looking at cannabis and legalization and talking about addiction, maybe we shouldn't even just be talking about cannabis. Maybe we should be talking about addiction generally and how we treat that and how we send people to prison and warehouse people in prison as opposed to providing actual true resources for people. We punish addiction as opposed to giving people the resources they need because sometimes, people will not be successful reintegrating. Sometimes people will not be successful getting off of the drug of choice. And we need to be constantly providing people to get themselves where they ultimately want to be. And when it comes down to addiction, and people are addicted to many things. We're talking about cannabis, but there's also alcohol, there's sugar, there's food, there's sex, there's work. I read a really interesting book, and it was something demons. It'll come to me, but it's written by a Canadian doctor who works in a medical system that just treats people with addiction. And he spends a lot of the book talking about the different kinds of addictions that we have in our own life. And he just talks about how when he passes by the music store that sells CDs, that he has this compulsion, this urge to go and buy those CDs. So he's addicted to work to get money because he's addicted to music, buying things that he doesn't need. And you could say that there are many things that are unhealthy with his relationship with work because it hurts his relationship with his family. There's
right.
It hurts, just spending money on things that he doesn't use, doesn't need. And so we hyper focus when we have status quo changes on what the negative is. So in this case with cannabis, we hyper focus on the issue of neurological development, which is a legitimate concern. And I don't mean to underplay all these concerns because there are legitimate concerns. And children getting their hands on the drugs and stunting their growth and what happens with, maybe short-term memory loss or a whole host of things that you could really say that cannabis is not great for. You could say those about a whole lot of things. There's pros and cons to anything. As someone who's been a casual user for 15 years and who has not struggled with addiction, do we just want to look at this in terms of all the problems? Or do we want to say, for the people that have problems, let's develop a system to make sure that they get the help they need. Let's ensure that children aren't using these drugs in the way that we ensure that they don't use cigarettes or alcohol. It's not foolproof, but we're going to do the best that we can. A lot lot comes down to parental supervision. And for the people that do want to use these drugs, let's make sure that they can do so in a way that they're not getting anything off the black market. So they're not getting, K2 and ODing on the New Haven Green. Let's make sure we have a system where, we don't have moonshine being made out of the tub anymore. We have a very systematic, regulated market to make sure that people are safe. I go even further than this, and I think that legalizing and regulating for that reason is good. I never make the tax argument. Getting revenue from that is an ancillary benefit. That's fine. That's not why I think we should do it. I think we also need to quite frankly, there's a reparation aspect to this, in that white folk and people of color smoke at very similar rates, but it's really just people of color who have been affected by this. So there's a reparative aspect to this as well. But I believe in a model that says, if you legalize and regulate everything, I'm not going to go to the store and buy meth if I've never done it before. People who don't have addiction issues aren't going to start using hardcore drugs. The people that use hardcore drugs have gotten there almost ubiquitously because they have some sort of trauma in their background. Addiction doesn't just appear out of nowhere. And so it just so happens that drugs are one way that addiction manifests itself, but it can manifest itself in a whole host of other ways that we don't criminalize. And so if we were to look at drugs as just more of one avenue of addiction, and we look to attack addiction, and we look at a model that's harm reduction, we know that people will be addicted. We know that we're never going to get rid of these drugs because there's a market for it, and we've tried for decades, and we put so much money and ruined so many lives doing it. If we treated people humanely and we said, you're not a criminal, this is a mental health issue, we know you can't stop yourself. If you can't stop yourself, here's a way that you can do this so that you won't kill yourself. And that, to me, is the most humane way to look at this problem. We are so far from that conversation. That's a third rail conversation that, quite frankly, if you have it in the wrong room, you will not be taken seriously. At the same time, if you speak with people in the medical profession, or people who are psychotherapists, or people who deal with addiction, it's, you can't force somebody to heal. You can't force somebody to eliminate their addiction. But what you can do is provide them the resources for when they are ready to get there. Even knowing that when you provide those resources, they will fail the majority of the time. And it's a cumulative process of getting over addiction. But then you also need to make sure that you have community buy-in. And that's hard too. So this is a very long road to get there. And it's a big part of what I think is a problem with our prison system, is a problem with our punitive model, that if we were to be more results oriented, then I think that we would make a lot better decisions. But a lot of what we do is, you don't want this behavior, make it illegal. And it's a very easy way to legislate, but it's the worst possible way to legislate.
Right. Well, there's a couple, in doing some research and going outside of the United States, because even in Colorado, it's pretty recent, really, for statistics. And the one country I found was Portugal,
Yep.
where drugs are legal, and they've actually had a decrease in the use in drugs.
Right.
So I think we have to look at that piece of it.
Right.
And you've made some really good points and some food for thought, to get those wheels turning.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate it. Our time's up. I know we could probably go on for another half hour.
I go on for another day.
I know.
Get up already, Jane.
And again, and being a virtually busy day at the Capitol today. So
Yes,
I really appreciate you coming on the show. And I learn something new every time I talk to you. So I appreciate it. And I'm sure our viewers will too.
I appreciate you, Jane.
You too, Josh.
All right.
With that, I want to thank everyone who came in to view today. The show will air in a few weeks. It's Tuesday nights at 9:00 on Win TV. Thank you to Howard and Jenny for all their work in helping make this show go. So I look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of On the Porch. Thank you.